I never start with the idea of an association. I start with all the things that I've been saying here, so that when we arrive at the more formal aspect of what Steiner had in mind, which he only sketched, although these lectures were given very close to the end of his life, and they're very indicative, outlining. If he'd stayed, if he'd done nothing else for the rest of his life, he would have said a lot of other things, but that didn't happen. And so you have to be very careful about this. And you also have to look at what he actually did in his own business life. And one good example of that is he was at that time the chairman of an organization which was called The Coming Day. And this organization was, I call it an organization, but if I describe it, it may be what he meant as an association or maybe an example. But basically, it was a group of companies, so productive companies, a sawmill, a tobacco factory, and I don't know what. So, not Reiki practitioner, not like in the LET system where everybody's doing something, but it's a bit weird what they're doing. Reiki and a bit of this and a bit of that, but not really producing anything. These were serious businesses and quite substantial businesses. And the idea was that they would work together, in my terms, like an M corporation. An N corporation is where in the middle of a corporation, you have the finance office, and this isn't what Steiner would say, but this is what I would say about an N corporate, and it keeps the productive aspect of the business highly profitable, with a lot of financial discipline, and it sucks to itself, all the profit comes out immediately. So the departments are kept starved of their profit. They have to go make more profit. They can't hold the capital. That goes to head office. And the head office then just ensures there's enough money for R&D in this company, so it can constantly innovate and so on. And this is a little bit like The Coming Day, because the idea was these companies would serve the world with whatever they were doing, and then the surplus they would generate, some of it would go to shareholders, but a significant part would go to finance, for example, a clinic or research in other areas. And in his mind, these are all sort of held together through this organization called The Coming Day, and of which he was the chair. And, this is a really important example to know about and to study. People say it failed and so on, but yes, it did, kind of. But what business didn't fail in hyperinflation in 1922 in Germany? So I don't buy when people say yes, but it didn't work. As I say, yeah, nothing worked in 1922, not anywhere, right? Certainly not in the Anglo-Saxon world. Nothing was working here. We had a general strike in 1926 in England, and then the whole thing crashed in 1929. So no one's got anything to brag about at that point in time, when you had to take wheelbarrows of money to buy a loaf of bread. So it's very important to know this and to look into how he was trying to make this work. And it's a larger image of how the productive economy, you might say, from its surpluses, we would fund an opera house or something like this. It's not rocket science. And even if you read Richard Eel's book, who was the head of General Electric, so he's a pretty serious player in the United States, he wrote this book about the corporation. This is before Milton Friedman said the only purpose of corporations is to make money for shareholders story. But before he said that, Richard Eels had said, no, the purpose of corporation, at least in the United States, is to serve its customers well, to make a good profit for its shareholders, right? And to generate surpluses to fund culture. Those are the three purposes of an American corporation, according to him, and he was the head of one. So this is, this isn't Steiner speaking. He wasn't a Steiner person. He was just the head of General Electric. And if you just dwell on that, and along comes Milton Friedman and says, no, only one of those count, which is you just have to make profits for the shareholder. That's it. Well, then what's happened to the other two? Even if I play with my fingers like this, it's huge to see what Milton Friedman has done with his nice one-liner compared to what Richard Eales was saying. And if you then imagine General Electric or Microsoft or Amazon, you know, it's never going to happen. But if you imagine all these huge corporations, right, or Nike had abided by this threefold purpose of a corporation, we wouldn't be in the world we're in at the moment. That's absolutely clear. And this is nothing, none of these people were saying I read a lecture by Steiner, they knew nothing about this. They just knew how the nature of economic life is threefold, or more particularly the nature of corporate life is. So if you go into these examples, both Steiner's working example, his actual experience, and into these other places, you can then see, even if I stay with Richard Eales, you'd still have to ask the question, so how are these three purposes going to, you know, how they're going to be related inside the business? How are you going to know you've served your customer well? That's going to be sales, you know, largely a sales question, especially if you don't get repeat sales. I mean, that's your normal measure. If you're an entrepreneur, you don't, I'm touching on your subject. As an entrepreneur, I have never, ever sat down with a consumer. There's absolutely no point whatsoever. The consumer is an egotistical person necessarily, protecting his or her balance sheet necessarily, and only interested in the price going down necessarily, right? Just, you know, so there's no point having a discussion with that person. If you're in business, at least that's my experience, you know your customers. You just know what's going on, and you can sense before you share a price. You've already kind of made a subconscious or less than subconscious image of what price this customer paid compared to this one. And so what a lot of people attribute to associations, I don't, because the entrepreneur already knows his market or her market. And if you don't understand this, then I'd say, well, you're not really an entrepreneur, and your best bet is to get out of business. And if you're trained through a business school and you come to manage a business, you are not an entrepreneur either, because you are just looking at the world through tropes. You have no direct experience of what you're doing, and you're not even responsible for the capital that you're making or losing by your perceptions. So for me, it's a hugely complicated topic, because a lot of times when people talk about associations and what they think Steiner's talking about, they cut out or have no notion of the perceptive role of the middleman, of the entrepreneur. And as an entrepreneur, we can discuss what we have to do with profits. That's you could discuss that with Richard Eales of General Electric. But first they have to be there, and they won't be there unless I'm perceptive, unless I perceive the market, right? And so even in an ordinary organization, whether it's a big one or a small one, these three elements are there. Have I satisfied my customers? And the proof of that is that they return to buy things, nothing else. You don't need to do marketing. You need to make sure you open when you say you're going to open. You're nice to everybody. My wife's shop, if you go to my wife's shop, she will greet you, not in order to create turnover, but just human being to human being. This makes all this difference compared to going to a shop where someone's on their things and they're playing with their mobile phone because it's not their business and they really don't care. You've already lost the sale just by this disconnection. And then, how do you know how much profit belongs to the shareholders? How much you need to retain for the operation? How much is really not necessary for this business? All this is a kind of outward expression. How do I know when I'm thinking, when it's my metabolic system, when it's my breathing problem? So I'm going into a lot of detail about this because the last thing I want to come to is the so-called association. And when Steiner talks about these things, in the economics lectures in particular, he talks about the need to get the producer, the consumer, and the distributor working together. Maybe creating an association, if but I'm not sure that would ever happen in real life. For a couple of reasons. First of all, in my business experience, it never happens. This is what a community-supported agriculture is pretending this can happen. It's pretending the farmer can sit down with consumers and agree with them in January in the Northern Hemisphere how many carrots they're going to want in June or August. and the price. And so they agree. And then he says, okay, I'm going to grow 20 tons of carrots. And they say, okay, here's $300,000 for the next 6 months of your operation. And the idea is at the end of 6 months, he's had liquidity. Now he's got 2 tons of carrots and they belong to us. No way. Right? I can tell you from experience, by the time that this customer gets to July, they've lost interest in carrots. They want, it's going to sound silly, they want cabbages, they want something else, but they certainly don't want the carrots that they pre-funded. Even though the carrots belong to them, they're not going to want them. So this whole kind of way of working for me is just unrealistic. And if you're in business, it's somehow your skill in business. When we call it the middleman in plain English. You're the one who's here in the middle, and you have to figure out how you're going to relate the customers that come in your shop to your suppliers. If I use the example of a shop, that's nothing I'm doing. I'm just between these two things, and the only way these two things are going to balance is through my skill in the shop. And I could give you endless examples. Try selling tomatoes at midday on a hot afternoon when everyone's going to watch football. Just try selling those, because primarily that was my experience. The women come in to buy their shopping, and they know it's hot, and they know the tomatoes are getting, and they know I want to get rid of them. So they don't shop at 9 o'clock, they shop at 12 o'clock, right? Just try it, and just run a vegetable stall. I can tell you, in the street, right? You have no intention of taking all this stuff home. What's the point? But if you want the market to clear, you're going to have to play all sorts of, you're going to have to be very skillful. And the distributor has this really middle role function. He has no existence other than realizing what's going on in these other two poles of production and consumption, and making them balance. And when you know this is the primary role of an entrepreneur, to resolve these two poles, and then you think, oh, we live in a world which is always trying to cut out the middleman. It's it's literally trying to cut out the heart and the lungs, is what they're saying. Then these poles will never find their relationship. So I'm very allergic to associations because I know as an entrepreneur, they hardly ever operate, and they're hardly ever necessary. Conceptually, what's necessary is that I think from outside, that I think about the world I'm operating in, and how can I, like Richard Eels, how can I serve my customers? How can I serve my shareholders, my investors? And how can I then shed the excess? If every business school said the reason you go into business is to do these three things: serve your customers well, meet their needs, not yours. It's a very subtle thing. Make cars people want, not cars your shareholders need to have made in order to serve them a profit. Then make a decent profit for your shareholders. Not every penny gets to them. You're not only there to serve them, unfortunately, Milton, you have to remember that. And then when you have a surplus, identify it and get rid of it. Fund a hospital, fund a school, or do something, right? If every corporation was to do that, Steiner would never speak about associations. And so for me, a huge macro aspect of this is an association would be a corporation that did this. A corporation that didn't abuse the market by being aware of a lot of things that nobody else knew, by keeping these two poles unaware of each other, but brought them together in a way that only the entrepreneur can resolve the riddle that production and consumption live in two separate universes. And you only need to go into a market, and you come into a market with your excess goods. You never go into the market with the stuff you need to eat at home. If you're a farmer, for example, it's always your surplus product that comes into the market. It's, you kept at home the food you need to eat, and all you come into the market for is the things you didn't get from your own production. So it's a huge exchange of what we've all got in surplus. And then the market has to clear. I mean, in a real market, you just go in the market, nobody wants to take home what they brought into it. They want to take home what they've come to swap. And so this is a hugely, it's a kind of middle realm thing that's going on all the time, and be very careful to make it formal. And a company can operate like this. A market operator is always doing this, especially, and it's a point Steiner makes very clear, when traders meet traders, you have pure economics, because they have nothing. You know, what they're doing, they're watching the surplus, they're watching the exchange of goods, and they want the market to clear, because they know when it clears, so to speak, there'll be a huge pile of money in the middle of it. There'll be such a surplus because, as I said very early on, you can't just trade to a kind of break even. Nobody can. Break even never happens. You will always have too much of something, and you have to shed this and get rid of it or swap it for something you need. Well, that process is always going on, and even if you exchange for everything you need, just doing that will create more than you need. And this, when you monetize it, it's like, so when the market clears, there's a pile of money in the middle of it that nobody needs. Otherwise, they would have taken it home. And every trader, this is me making an image of what's said. This is where you need to go for pure economics, because whose money is that? And when the merchant banks start, that's how they started. They're the ones who, when the market's cleared, we've got a pile of money. And a lot then depends on what they do with this money. They're the ones who could either put it back into circulation, we'll get into this topic, or just buy another yacht or another thing for them. So I'm putting this in a lot of detail because I think you have to come livingly into the situation. You have to find examples in history. You have to find examples in modern economic life, which echo, or I was going to say which echo Steiner, or which Steiner echoes. Put it that way around. He's not inventing anything. It's really important not to have the idea. He has some theoretical exercise. He's just being perceptive and naming what he perceives, if you like. But he's not thereby creating anything. It's not a second reality or anything like this. And if you keep going down this path, which is, it may be exhausting to listen to it, it's even more exhausting to try and do it, where you have to manage all these things. Then you come to complications, because clearly in the economics lectures he gave, at least in that 14 lectures, he spoke a lot about economics already in the, you talk about 1922, he was already talking about in 1905, already in the end of the 19th century, he was talking about economics to the workers in Berlin, where he gave lectures. So there's a lot he said about economics. Most of it's in German and not translated. It's always very consistent. If you read the economics lectures in 1922, you might think this is, first time he's had all these ideas, but you need to read all the stuff to know he's had these ideas for a very long time, and he's very consistent. And but in those 1922 lectures, he does kind of give a focus on what he calls associations, meaning some kind of organization whereby the producers of a product, the distributors of it, and the consumers of it all get together, sort of organizationally. I don't really believe that's possible. And I know that many people then in the Steiner world, in the Steiner movement, they have created such organizations, typically with agriculture, it always comes into what I've called a folksy example. It's kind of easy to say, well, how will my market garden work? Oh, I have a meeting every year with all the, I'm a shop. I have a meeting every year with all the producers whose stuff I bring and all the customers, and we have a big meeting and we discuss that. Those examples always end up in a kind of farm, right? And I was saying, so how's Boeing going to operate? Or how is the post office down the street? Don't take the easy one, which is not representative of very much, right? Go out into the wider economy and, take other examples to test your thing. And what you will come upon all the time is if people don't think associatively, they can call their thing an association, and it isn't. And so many of these producer-consumer associations that people have created, in fact, set prices. They're not perceiving prices at all. They're not talking about prices forthcoming. They say, okay, this is we want so many carrots, that's going to cost so much, so here's the money to buy the carrots, and they're saying the carrots are therefore worth the $300,000 we've lent you. So they're just setting prices. So you can call things associations, but they just think in a unassociatively.